Good morning. I read from Matthew 25:31 through 40. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. Nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me." Thank you.
Good morning, church. God bless you all. First of all, we want to give you thanks for having us here this morning, meeting you, and sharing together this time of worship, but also of a time of always acknowledging that there is a God who cares for us, that there is a God who wants to walk with us. And we will begin this morning reading a story that was told to us by a pastor in Colombia in one of our first assignments there to accompany communities. And around that, not necessarily around that story, but because of that story and the questions that this story made us that day, we will be thinking about this text in Matthew, especially that question that is in the text. God, when did we see you? When was it that we see you?
Camilo Chavez was a 23-year-old and was part of the youth ministry at his church. He was baptized in that congregation. Even as a young child, he helped his mother with church activities, including helping to establish a new church. Like many young people, Camilo moved with his mother to another town for work. There, they were welcomed by the pastor of the church where Camilo had been baptized. At 1 p.m. on Saturday, October 26, 2019, Camilo was concluding a prayer and fasting retreat with the youth group of his church when a man approached him on a motorcycle and asked him to get on. Camilo got on the motorcycle and he was never seen again.
Stories like these made us make that question. When did we see God? When a young kid was disappeared from a community. When did we see you? When the community was asking questions of his return that never happened. And this gospel passage is one that makes us both hopeful and very uncomfortable. And the gospel writer has a particular way to making us think about what is important in our life as followers of the way of Jesus in times that we feel final. And he makes us think about those final times when, while painting a vivid scene of the final judgment, how do we see God in times that feel final, where everything seems to come to an end? What helps us make sense of times like this? A vision of God that sits on his throne with all nations gathered before him? That helps us think about final times? The gospel writer helps us think that what determines the sense of a plentiful life in times like these is not whether or not you believe in a glorified and all-powerful version of God, but a very down-to-earth narrative of God. Did you feed the hungry? That's the narrative of God. Did you welcome the stranger? Did you clothe the naked? Did you visit the sick and imprisoned, as you were telling now this morning? The measure of our lives is not church or church attendance or theology or even our prayers, but whether we cared for the hungry, whether we welcomed the stranger, whether we clothed the naked or visited the prisoner. The theology or the image of God parable is the following. In the final times, every time we feel times are final, Jesus, God, the Christ, identifies himself with the least of these. It is not a glorified version of God. We find God in times that feel final, not in glorified and all-powerful versions of God, or we find God in the least of these. When we serve the most vulnerable, we are serving Christ himself, and when we ignore them, we are ignoring God himself.
And we often expect to meet Jesus in church or in worship or in our prayers. And don't get me wrong, we do. But Matthew 25 reminds us that Jesus is always waiting for us in the streets, in the refugee camps, in the hospitals, in the prisons, and in the places marked by extreme violence and poverty. And that is why Global Ministries exist, to help the church remind us that Christ is present everywhere, in every culture and in every community, that it doesn't depend on one person. Global Ministries is not just the work of one denomination or one church, or like in another church they told us it's not enough to be just one church. It's the common mission of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and the United Church of Christ. And together, we walk with nearly 250 faith-based international partners in close to 90 countries around the world. And Global Ministries lives out the truth, like Pastor Lee was saying that this morning, that mission is not just about one church or one person going to help or tell them how to live their life fully to God's view. It's about walking side by side with other people, by serving together, by recognizing Christ already present in every community, in every face we see.
In times that feel final, we tend to close ourselves in bubbles, in churches, and we tend to do everything in favor of the local church. About mission, it makes us go outside of the church and try to once again come to terms with what God's mission is. It's not the church's mission, it's God's mission. And it's not about rescuing or dominating. It's about mutuality. It's about praying for one another, learning from one another, building relationships that last, and building relationships where we find faith all over again. And the Latin America and the Caribbean office, walks with dozens of partner churches and ecumenical organizations in over 20 countries, where we are responding together to God's call to serve all creation. Not only humans, but all creation. In this region, we have been accompanying partners as they grow ministries through prayer, sending and receiving of mission co-workers, of course, financial support, but also this missional ministry is accompanied by our partners in the rich exchange of ideas and lasting friendships.
And in Latin America, the church reminds us that ministry is not limited to pastors and missionaries, but includes all walks of life: nurses, teachers, lawyers, human rights advocates, farmers, health educators, and you can continue mentioning them all. And all of those who use their gifts to embody God's love. Each vocation, each act of service becomes a sermon of its own, announcing God's justice and peace in daily life. But to make this viable, we are led by 5 core values in Global Ministries that lead our work and walk in mission. And those core values are back there, thank you. They are mentioned there: community, mutuality, justice, peace, and presence. But those 2 of these values are crucial to our work in Colombia, with justice and peace.
And for more than 60 years, Colombia has been mired in a complex internal armed conflict, starring different actors and staged in different territories of the nation, and the alarming number of its victims amounts today to more than 10 million people in 60 years. With nearly 12 peace processes in its history between insurgent and paramilitary groups, even today the impacts of this conflict persists in everyday life. Around 1990, Colombia signed a peace agreement with the M19 guerrillas, and in 2016, more recently, it managed to sign a peace agreement with the FARC-EP guerrillas, which was one of the oldest guerrilla groups in the territory.
And usually, when we're giving this presentation, I like to highlight the women as victims of this conflict, because for decades, women have carried heavy burden and grave risk simply for being women. This is not about violence, this is not about drugs, it's just because they are women. What are the risks? Sexual violence, forced displacement. If you have seen the Encanto movie, if you haven't, I suggest you see it today. If you have seen it, when the abuela is describing to Mirabel her situation of how she got there and how she lost her husband, all of those people walking through the jungle, through the forest to get out of that threat, that is forced displacement. This is not just one family, one woman. This is 200, 300 people having to leave their houses on immediate notice, because if not, they are dead. Also, they suffer enslavement in domestic roles or feminine roles. Also, they suffer the threats and the recruitment of their children. They are being taken forcefully, and they are even forced into pregnancies, unwanted pregnancies, unwanted abortions too. And many have lost husbands, sons, brother, cousins, either killed or disappeared. And they have had to step up and become overnight the head of the households. But yet, during all of this suffering, they continue moving forward, moving the communities, moving their churches, even though they have faced silencing and fear when raising their voice for justice. Leaders who work for peace and human rights are often threatened, and too many have lost their lives for daring to speak the truth and to protect their families.
Justa Paz is an organization of the Christian Mennonite Church of Colombia. Xiomara was saying that one church was not enough, or one denomination was not enough, so we're disciples working with UCC, working with a Mennonite church, but over there being members of a Methodist church in Colombia. So There you go, the ecumenical work all over the place. So it's an organization of the Christian Mennonite Church of Colombia that has been a clear witness to the gospel of peace. And it has been founded, Justapaz was founded in 1990, developing a great experience in the local, regional, national level, together with Christian evangelical churches, of course, but also with socio-ecclesial organizations, civil society organizations, in training organization and action processes for the construction of lifestyles that leads to a just and sustainable peace. That means that it's a Mennonite church working with civil society, also with civil society organizations that are not necessarily Christian, but also working with Christian churches and communities that are very conservative communities as well.
And in this way, during the years, the past positioned the voices of the churches in spaces of advocacy and fundamental decision-making to improve the living condition of communities that have lived during the armed and social conflict in Colombia. But to mobilize all of these processes, Justapaz has 5 main areas or 5 emphases. One of them is peace building and reconciliation. The other one is nonviolence, conscious objection, and youth protection. The third one is communication for peace. And the 4th and the 5th one, we'll be talking a bit more about that.
I had the opportunity to serve in the area of historical memory, human rights, and political advocacy, where we accompany the evangelical Christian communities, victims of the armed conflict, documenting their stories and advocating for the protection of human rights, truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition. That means this is just pictures of documentation processes. We would gather the stories of the communities and the victims of this armed conflict because their stories have been denied by national authorities, by international authorities as well. And their stories and the memory of their communities, we will gather those stories and put them in annual reports that we hand to the national government so they know what is happening all over the place. Also, we would do social, legal, and pastoral accompaniment.
And in my case, I accompany the area of women, peace, and environmental justice, where we empower women to restore trust in themselves, to heal communities, and strengthen their active and effective participation in decision-making spaces for just and lasting peace. And how do we do this? There are a couple of slides where you can see it. We do them by creating this seed capital program and peace initiative, where they are given a kind of a grant for environmental justice projects. We also do psychosocial accompaniment, and we work with kids, which are called Semillas de Vida, or Seeds of Life, where we give different workshops, or we create the material for the women in the territory to have like Sunday Bible school with the kids, but talking about different topics about transformative justice, environmental justice, gender-based violence, how to recognize them and stop them, so that they can know that there's a different world, that they can do a different job than past generations have done. So they know that there is no repetition. They don't need to repeat the war. And yeah. And the last part is the spaces, the gathering for the women, so they can talk. These are different women with different backgrounds, Catholics, evangelical, farmer women, so they can all gather and talk about reconciliation process and also political advocacy in their territory, so they can join forces to change the realities.
Well, in the time we've been doing this itineration and going to different churches, every time communities have told us that all this seems like what is happening right now in the States. And many communities have questions about reconciliation initiatives in local levels here. What Xiomara just told, that story is way longer story. It took a couple of months of doing hard work with that community of women. That was just women that were torn apart by war. And we had the opportunity with Xiomara and the group to do this reconciliation initiatives there. So the question we make is slow, when do we see? The mission of God is precisely seeing Christ in the least of these. And those we accompanied in ourselves. When we hear these stories, we remember those words. And when we, Xiomara and myself, ask ourselves, when do we see? The answer for us is simple now. And it's not that simple. We saw Christ in Colombia, in territories of Chocó and Cali, and many other territories in Colombia. We saw the Christ in the wounds of women in Colombia, their courage, their leadership, their faith in suffering. This is also the presence of Christ among us. So we are called not only to listen, but to walk with them, to pray, to advocate, to share in their struggle for peace and justice.
So where do you as a church and individual persons meet Jesus today? Maybe it is in the immigrant family looking for welcome. Maybe it is in the unhoused neighbor asking for dignity. Maybe it isn't in the youth resisting the pull of gangs and war. Every time we say yes to them, we are saying yes to Christ.
And in the end of our lives, or when we feel times are final, the question will not be, how big is your church, or how many Bible verses did you memorize? The question will be, did you feed me? Did you welcome me? Did you clothe me? Not what you believed, but did you visit me when I feel alone? May we be a people who can answer, yes, Lord, we did that, but not with pride, but with gratitude. Because in serving the least of these, we have found you. Amen. Thank you.